quo around the world is untenable for women and girls. In terms of the work that we need to do to create a livable and just planet for all. I think there's intentionality in building out agendas grounded in feminist principles and analysis to allow for a deeply important conversation around the inadequacy of efforts so far to deliver on gender equality, often delinked from systemic root causes, whether that be trade, corporate power, environmental destruction, or militarism. And I think that the Generation Equality Forum and the 6 action coalitions, the 6 action areas, but of course the broader based analysis that we're bringing and the intersections of those crises is really what's going to enable us to create transformative change. A truly feminist analysis of our current crisis cannot be divorced from the deeply structural and intersectional understanding of how power is created and concentrated. And therefore the work that we're doing to not only build a just and healthy feminist future, but to articulate a pathway for how we get there is no small task. And one of my colleagues, Noeline Nabulivu from Diva for Equality, has often said, we don't have time for small work. What we need is big work. And I think what we are trying to do together under this action coalition is certainly big work. But that big work is not just starting today. The big work started decades ago, and it was really grounded in the Beijing Platform for Action itself, where we already understood this challenge. I'm quoting directly from the Platform for Action, which says, the continuing environmental degradation that affects all human lives has often a more direct impact on women. Women's health and their livelihoods are threatened by pollution and toxic waste, large-scale deforestation and desertification, drought, depletion of soil and of coastal and marine resources, with a rising incidence of environmentally related health problems or even deaths reported among women and girls. Those most affected are rural and indigenous women whose livelihoods and daily subsistence depends on sustainable ecosystems. And in the Beijing Platform for Action, we called then to ensure the leadership of grassroots and indigenous women in all forms of decision-making, to integrate a gender perspective into environmental decision-making, and to center the participation of local communities. And so while in 25 years we have seen change, we have seen deeper and a more holistic understanding of the deep intersections of these crises. We have seen incredible women leaders at the forefront of environmental decision-making, of gender-just climate solutions. We've also seen increasing climate chaos. We have seen a world reaching tipping points that need desperate and urgent action to really create systemic change towards that just and livable future we all need. And so I think what we're hoping to do today in this session is to present to you a draft blueprint of what feminist transformative action for climate justice looks like. We want to build momentum around the urgent need for ambition to support these actions by 2026. We want to present to you a draft blueprint that is really open to your engagement, your ideas on what is going to actually create change, what is going to help us move the needle from the things that we knew 25 years ago. We want to galvanize your interest as allies in being commitment makers. What can you do in your work today to align with the broad transformational change that we're calling for? And we want to engage all stakeholders in really coming up with high impact, game-changing, measurable, scalable commitments towards reaching our collective action. And I don't bring up the work that has been done in Beijing to give a sense of hopelessness. In fact, I think in that there is nothing but hope. There's nothing but ambition about the fact that we continue to push for the future that we know is possible. And I want to, before passing over to my colleague Lopa, I want to just share a quote with you. It's one of my favorite quotes that keeps me going in this space, by Aurora Levins Morales, who says, to live a lifetime of audacity, dwelling in the place where joy meets justice year after year can only be sustained by being so in love with a vision of what's possible that we no longer flirt with despair. And so I bring you a lot of love and joy into the vision that we have for transformative feminist action for climate justice. And with that, I'd love to pass over to Lopa for some opening remarks and sharing the story of these action coalitions.
Thank you so much, Bridget, and greetings to all on this call right now and in this space. My name is Lopa Banerjee. I'm the executive coordinator of the Generation Equality Forum for UN Women and also the director of the Civil Society Division. Let me start by thanking all of you. Thank you so much to the Action Coalition leaders and partners for walking this journey with us so far, for this moment that we are now in, where we are kicking off the Action Coalition journey in Mexico, and that we will walk on to Paris and beyond. There was one simple reason why we set up the Generation Equality Forum and the Action Coalitions, and that was because we were impatient. We were impatient that 25 years after Beijing and its magnificent aspirations, not a single country in the world had achieved gender equality. And while there has been progress and we have seen change, it was simply not enough. And then the impact of environmental degradation and climate change continued to push women and girls to the brink and off the brink. And yet their resilience remained as they fought in their communities and in their countries for action that would enable their families and their communities to lead a life that they sought for themselves. And then we had the pandemic, which not only illuminated existing inequalities, but exacerbated them. And so we are at this moment now where it is clear, as Bridget just highlighted, that small, incremental, isolated action will simply not get us anywhere. And that is the promise and the strength of the Action Coalitions, a global, multi-stakeholder, innovative platform that is poised to build the equal, inclusive, and sustainable world that we want, the equal world, building back equal from COVID. What a journey we have all traveled together. What a journey all of you Action Coalition leaders have traveled together, from when we started with the idea of commemorating Beijing to developing the 6 actions plus the Women, Peace and Security Compact, to selecting the themes of these actions, and then following that through over 2,000 expressions of interest, coming to this collection, this cohort of 95 leaders across governments, civil society, youth leaders, UN agencies, international organizations, and private sector. This diverse, inclusive, fierce group that is setting this bold agenda for transformation. This session, these days now, the effort is to arrive at a transformative blueprint through the 24 game-changing actions that we saw launched on International Women's Day. And that this blueprint will ensure, the idea is that this blueprint will ensure that more girls, more adolescents, women in all their diversity are at the heart of the climate justice agenda, that their resilience is strengthened, that their leadership is strengthened, and that there is funding. Up first and foremost, that there is funding that then assures the gender responsive climate action that we need through resourcing and through data production. So thank you so much. We encourage more stakeholders to join as commitment makers. And thank you so much for your leadership, for your engagement, for your action, for your boldness up to this point in time, and for the vision and the courage that we will need going forward. Thank you, and really looking forward to this set of discussions now. Back to you, Bridget.
Thank you so much, Lopa, for those words. And I did just want to acknowledge to folks that we saw in the chat that there were some issues with the videos, but hopefully that has been solved now, and you'll have been able, and you will be able to see everyone. And so I'm delighted to introduce Her Excellency Marcela Guerrero Campos, who is the Minister on the Status of Women and Executive President of the National Institute of Women of Costa Rica, to really share the vision of the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Coalition. And I'd love to ask, what does Feminist Action for Climate Justice, why does it matter? And how does the Action Coalition advance this vision through its blueprint? Over to you.
Muy buen día a todas y a todos. Me encantó el mensaje tan optimista de Bridget. Realmente lo recibimos y creo que desde las mujeres es un hecho que estamos abrazando esta coyuntura tan aguda que vive el mundo en diferentes frentes con un gran optimismo, Bridget. También quiero saludar a Lopa, con quien estuvimos ayer conversando hasta altas horas de la noche sobre los impactos de los mecanismos de igualdad en los países, y un abrazo a todas las panelistas, enviándole ese abrazo amoroso que Lopa y Bridget nos abren. Quiero señalar que Costa Rica está liderando de forma contundente la alianza para el cambio climático desde una perspectiva feminista. Y en ese sentido es inevitable señalar que el mundo se enfrenta a 4 grandes crisis: la sanitaria, la económica ya preexistente y que amenazaba seriamente los caminos de la igualdad que han venido trabajando todos los países. También la crisis climática que se nos ha anunciado y el esfuerzo que fue contraído en la COP de París, en donde por primera vez la humanidad se hace responsable de sus efectos al medio ambiente y al clima. Y también el colapso de la biodiversidad. Estos no son temas menores y no es casualidad que en medio de estas crisis también la perspectiva sobre los pisos de la igualdad estén visibilizándose de forma tan contundente. Quiero señalar que es oportuno el esfuerzo que hemos hecho para el Foro de Igualdad en términos de que sea intergeneracional en todos los aspectos del pacto mundial que merece nuestro planeta. Y en ese sentido, entre los temas prioritarios está la acción feminista por la acción climática. Como país, formamos parte junto con la academia y nuestro Ministerio de Ambiente en este liderazgo. 26 años después de la plataforma de acción de Beijing, continuamos enfrentando viejos y nuevos retos para avanzar hacia el disfrute y la garantía de nuestros derechos y de los derechos humanos de las mujeres en su diversidad, máxime en el contexto de la crisis multidimensional que acabo de señalar. El aumento en la violencia contra las mujeres, fundamentalmente en esta pandemia, la recarga de trabajo doméstico y de cuidado no remunerado, el aumento de los índices de desempleo de las mujeres, la inestabilidad, el debilitamiento de la autonomía económica son algunos de los impactos más visibles en contra de la calidad de vida de las mujeres y las niñas. Aspectos que parecen alejados de la preocupación por los impactos de la crisis climática, pero que están estrechamente relacionados, y es urgente visibilizarlos y abordarlos como parte de la estrategia de avance de los derechos humanos de las mujeres, de la mano de la conservación de la naturaleza y la resiliencia climática. Todas las personas, y en especial las mujeres, dependen de los recursos naturales para garantizar sus medios de vida, cuidar a sus familias y son las más afectadas por la degradación ambiental y desastres naturales. Por lo tanto, no es casual que sean las mujeres, las niñas, las jóvenes, las indígenas, las afrodescendientes, todas en su diversidad quienes han levantado su voz y han liderado importantes movimientos comunitarios e incluso mundiales demandando justicia climática y ambiental y proponiendo rutas de acción más efectivas y sostenibles. Por lo tanto, creemos que las mujeres tienen el potencial de liderar no solo soluciones inmediatas de resiliencia, sino también una transformación económica en armonía con la naturaleza. Esto significa para los estados pasar de la asistencia social al fortalecimiento de capacidades emprendedoras y activación económica de las mujeres. El escenario global actual no presenta la oportunidad de unirnos, formular objetivos comunes y promover un modelo de producción que integre economía verde y empoderamiento de las mujeres a favor de la igualdad entre mujeres y hombres, la reducción de la pobreza y la protección del medio ambiente. Es decir, estamos hablando de las alianzas entre las mujeres y más allá. En este sentido, la Coalición de Acción Feminista por la Justicia Climática ha priorizado acciones y compromisos para aumentar el acceso directo al financiamiento para soluciones climáticas con justicia de género. Voy a repetir, aumentar el acceso directo al financiamiento para soluciones climáticas con justicia de género. Habilitar a las mujeres y a las niñas para conducir una transición justa hacia una economía verde. Forjar la resiliencia de las mujeres y las niñas a los efectos del cambio climático, los riesgos de desastre y sobre todo donde tenemos que poner más rápida la acción climática, que es todo lo referido a adaptación. Aumentar la recopilación y uso de datos sobre la relación entre género y medio ambiente. A partir de lo anterior, nuestra visión para el 2026 pretende iniciar una transición hacia una economía verde, inclusiva y regenerativa que reconozca la interconexión entre cambio climático con los temas de justicia climática, proteja y amplíe las voces de las mujeres de la base y de las comunidades indígenas, incluidas las defensoras de primera línea en todos los ámbitos sociales, políticos y económicos. Fortalecer la participación equitativa y significativa de las mujeres y las niñas en toda su diversidad, en los procesos de toma de decisiones en todos los niveles, desde los instrumentos claves de la política climática, los planes nacionales de desarrollo y las respuestas climáticas centradas en los derechos humanos. Priorizar a las organizaciones de mujeres como socias por parte de instituciones financieras y la comunidad de donantes en materia de riesgo, quienes transfieren capital para apoyar sociedades resilientes e inversiones transformadoras en enfoques climáticos. Mejorar el acceso equitativo de las mujeres y las niñas en toda su diversidad a las finanzas, tecnologías, conocimiento climático y mejorar el acceso y control de los recursos naturales para su gestión, protección, incluso mediante la garantía de los derechos y la propiedad de la tierra. Estos son solo algunos de los objetivos y serán posibles con nuestro trabajo en alianza, articulado, sistemático y garantizando, como lo deseamos todas y todas, un mundo mejor. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much, Minister, for sharing that vision for, excuse me, sorry, there's a bit of an echo on my side. I'm not sure if others can hear that as well. I'm gonna continue. So thank you for sharing the vision of the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Coalition, really framing around how do we transition to a more resilient society, one in which gender equality and human rights are at the center of how we create our policies, how we create our economic systems. And I think that really when we look at the work of the four themes, currently the sub-themes of this action coalition around shifting climate finance, around enhancing the leadership of women and girls in all their diversity towards a more regenerative economy, around building the capacity of women and girls in all their diversity to build resilience, to mitigate, adapt to climate change impacts, and to really invest in that leadership and capacity building through the collection of intersectional data at the intersection of gender and climate. I think that we're really thrilled to hear from our other action co-leads about what are some of the initial thoughts we have in these particular areas. And so I'm going to turn now to our panel to present the sub-themes of the Action Coalition. And I'm going to ask each panelist to speak to 3 questions around this. So, how will the vision of the Action Coalition be achieved? What role can we play as government, civil society, youth organizations, private sector or philanthropic organizations to achieve that vision? And what obstacles or opportunities should stakeholders recognize in working to advance feminist action for climate justice? So first, I'm going to pass over to Raquel Lagunas, who's the director of the UNDP Gender Team, to talk a little bit about our finance-related actions, tactics, and commitments. Over to you, Raquel.
Thank you so much. And dear colleagues and friends, it is really a pleasure to be here today to discuss one of the most difficult, challenging, and critical aspects of the work of the Feminist Action Coalition, that is financing, right? As the Minister Marcela said, we have already seen how women and girls around the world are leading on climate change, are creating solutions at all levels. But we also know that the impact of climate change is by far stronger and harder in women and girls due to the entrenched structural gender inequalities. So despite this, women and girls have disproportionate access to financial resources. I wanted to give you one number coming from our colleagues from WEDO. The studies show that less than 3% of climate funding support women's and girls' climate activism. If we go to the numbers on just overall ODA for gender equality, not even climate change, I can give you some numbers also. Only 5% of the resources of the ODA tracked by the OECD goes to gender-specific projects or initiatives, and 40% to what we call gender mainstreaming initiatives. So the challenges are big, and this globally recognized role of women and girls really calls for a gender responsive climate finance action. So women cannot be anymore an afterthought here. Increased financial investment based on our experience is a matter of having a strong accountability framework and system to track the financial flows. But also, as the Minister Marcela said, having a deeper understanding of the implementation. What does it mean implementing feminist principles? What does it mean to implement gender responsive climate action? So in the context of coronavirus, I agree that even it is a very, very challenging situation for many women, men in the full diversity and scope. It opens also opportunities to prove at least the connection between economy, climate crisis, and gender equality. But also there are opportunities for more innovative public policies for gender equality. And as we watch trillions of dollars now that are being released for recover from the impact of COVID, I hope we also have the opportunity to shift where the money is going right now. So I also wanted to flag that the Action Coalition has full clarity that financial institutions, multilaterals, and the donor community must also prioritize women's organizations as a key partners. And it is a matter of rights, but it is very proven that women's organizations and social movements are the most efficient agents of transformation to change social practices, norms, and public perceptions. They are also the pillars of democracy. So to help to make this a reality, the Action Coalition recognized, first of all, that we need to implement and apply a systemic approach, right? So that the climate crisis is amplifying existing and pre-existing inequalities, intersecting inequities, including gender inequalities. So we also recognize that these inequalities are fully reinforced by agents of socialization, by the discriminatory gender social norms, but also by the institutions, public and private, right? And by practices of power and exclusion. Only intentional and targeted actions can reverse definitely this negative situation. So here the discussion is the how to do it. And the coalition wants to really open opportunities to put together different actors, public and private, and also social movements to work together to help women, first of all, to have direct access to financing, to increase, that's the second point, increase financing, the volume, the scope, the investment to fully address the gender gaps in climate change. And there are different possibilities, and to shift private and public capital towards green gender responsive investments. So we also wanted to treat women in their full diversity, making very visible their different needs and abilities, and by increasing and investing on collection of data to flag the different nuances of the situation of women across the world, local, national, and global. So how do we plan to achieve that? That's something that I hope, and we hope that all of you will be able to help and to contribute. So we wanted to ensure that there are direct channels of finance for gender just climate solutions. We are discussing and identifying as a priority, increase the support to gender ministries. You can see by having here our minister from Costa Rica, how can ministries of women can make a difference, but also building the bridge between ministries of women and ministries of environment and women's organizations. Second, we wanted to continue influencing inside the house, all our houses of the coalition, right? The influence the main climate funds to increase accountability over the money and over the impact of the initiatives and projects of all vertical funds and multilateral. And we wanted to start working with the private sector, raising awareness of different actors, and also targeting financial tools like gender lens investments, gender responsive procurement, gender bonds. So we will need to discuss what is the potential of each and see what can we do in the next 5 years, being realistic, but also continuing working with the private sector to ensure that they globally recognize gender equality standards while they transition towards green technologies. I will finish by just mentioning in UNDP, in our experience, we have been the first agency or entity tracking our investments, financial investments on gender equality. So we know very well how relevant it is to have systems in place that can monitor the budget, allocated budget at the budget and also expenditure level. So that's the first lesson that we learned. Strong indicators, solid accountability systems are the pillar to follow up and have a good accountability, right? Second, we really believe this can be done. And we have some positive experience. UNDP, as you know, we work on gender equality and climate change. We are on the front line. We have an initiative called Climate Promise, that is the world's largest offer supporting countries to enhance the nationally determined contributions. So those are the pledges under the Paris Agreement. So we work in 118 countries. And out of these 118 countries that we are helping governments to reduce emissions, 97% have concrete commitments to strengthen gender equality in their NDCs, national determined contributions. And we hope to see increase in the budget allocations during the next years, that is the implementation. But to give you a concrete example, how this can be possible. In Uzbekistan, UNDP, we have been piloting a green mortgage scheme in collaboration with local bank. And then women made up the majority of the mortgage borrowers, holding 67% of all loans. So this example illustrates how there are many different formulas to help, and how public and private capital can be invested, while at the same time we increase women's access to the property, to ownership over, in this case, over the home. So while they access to renewable energies. We also work with countries in the National Financing Framework for NDGs. With UN Women, we are now exploring how to develop gender equality bonds. So there is a big opportunity to work together and include the climate and the green component. Just to close, I wanted to make a call for action here. Our action coalition is striving to increase by 2026 a percentage of the global climate finance flows directed toward gender equality and women's organizations. So I wanted to call here governments, donor community, to join us, to help us to finalize, refine the commitments of the coalition. So we welcome your innovation, your capital, your ideas, and your support for this very ambitious goal that we have. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that, Raquel. I think that, this particular area of sub-theme of how do we shift the quantity and the quality of current climate finance so that it is reaching directly women and girls, feminist organizations, and groups that are delivering on climate just solutions on the ground. But then also, how do we redefine what our economic system looks like in general? I think this is an area where certainly we see a lot of connection to the Economic Justice Action Coalition, understanding that we need a shift, a broad shift in general of flows, the quantity and quality of finance available to create fiscal space to invest in solutions that both uphold environmental protection and integrity and support human rights and gender equality. And so thank you, Raquel, for showing us some of those very specific tactics and actions that are examples of how you shift the quantity and the quality of current climate finance. I think under this area, there are a lot of other tactics and strategies that this powerful potential of this coalition in bringing together different actors could be thinking about. What is that shift of our economic system look like in general? And for that, I want to then pass over to Maria Reyes, who's a youth activist from Fridays for the Future, to speak a bit about another sub-theme that's very much linked to how we transition our economic systems to be more compatible with our climate reality as well as gender equality, to talking about commitments around leadership and action. What does that look like? How do we advance feminist leadership for climate action? Over to you. Oh, and before, excuse me, could I ask that speakers who are no longer speaking, if you could just turn your videos off? Thanks so much. Over to you, Maria.
Well, thank you so much, moderator. As you said, my name is Maria Reyes. I'm a climate activist from Mexico, and I'm part of Fridays for Future International, which is a global movement fighting for climate justice. But I'm also part of Fridays for Future MAPA, which means Most Affected People and Areas. So I'm really honored to speak today about what our Action Coalition would like to do to help all women and girls in the full diversity with a just transition to first a sustainable economy and then a system change. The leadership of women and girls is crucial for creating the equitable and sustainable world we dream of. And as a youth leader, I know firsthand that our voices continue to be ignored and silenced, even though our skills and perspectives could make the world more sustainable and equal. We have already shown how effective our leadership can be. Young women and girls are missing for climate decision-making processes, but they have led global and national movements that have completely changed the climate discourse, making it disruptively clear and inclusive. Evidence also shows that electing women politicians leads to more ambitious climate laws and policies. We also need to support women and girls to access and build dignified careers in the fields that will create the sustainability-oriented jobs of tomorrow. Right now, women and girls are a small minority on these fields. This gap starts at the early stages of education and leads to large gender gaps in scientific research and development, and up to the boards of technology companies. This is a huge missed opportunity because studies from the private sector show that the more women that are on a board of directors, the lower the carbon emissions will be. So to support this leadership, our Action Coalition has created commitments for investing in knowledge hubs and digital platforms that connect women and girls, especially those from the most affected communities, to the climate crisis, like Indigenous women and girls, in order to equip them with the capacity building, educational tools, and resources needed to take on leadership roles and decision-making power in the climate justice arena and sustainable economy sectors. Also, increase awareness of and access to financial services, including digital financial services, to promote their economic independence. And provide support to environment rights defenders by creating access to legal services and networks. In 2018, 321 human rights defenders in 27 countries were criminalized and killed for their work, the highest number ever on record. And 77% of those were killed during defending land, environmental, or indigenous people's rights. Worth mentioning that the majority of them have been women, especially in Latin American countries like Mexico, where gender violence prevails and the social climate. So we need to tackle discriminatory gender norms and barriers around women's and girls' leadership for climate justice, including by promoting innovative tools that demonstrate the power of women and girls' leadership in changing the systemic structures to reduce fossil fuels consumption and therefore carbon emissions. We need to link COVID-19 recovery plans and stimulus packages to gender-responsive investments for transitioning to a just, sustainable economy. We need to create greater and better access at all levels to the educational tools and services needed to build dignified careers in sustainable economic sectors. This means developing and launching new best practice standards for sustainable gender transformative learning and including goals and policies for gender equitable education access in national climate planning. We're also investing in data collection and on developing capacity building programs for gender responsive and environmentally sustainable industrial and product design. And of course, calling on private sector actors to commit to integrate gender considerations into their sustainable transition plans and inclusive jobs training and upskilling programs. But it is also so important to mention that we need to make sure the private and governmental sectors include the most marginalized communities in the decision-making processes, especially on topics related to combating the climate crisis, which essentially involves all the sectors of the society because everything is systematically connected. So, well, closing, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak about the importance of supporting the leadership of women and girls. We must keep building a platform to empower women, especially those from the most affected communities, to raise their voices and speak for themselves, because the fight for climate justice must be a feminist fight.
Thank you so much for those powerful words, Maria. I think that really here, this is an area in terms of changing the face and the nature of leadership and changing the nature of power towards feminist leadership and centering the voices of young women, young feminists, Indigenous and grassroots women This is something that was centered in the Beijing Platform for Action 25 years ago. And so how we renew and how we invest in real change over the next 5 years, I think is going to be critical. And I want to raise up what you raised as well, that I think in the Action Coalition, we're keenly aware that it's not enough to call for leadership. It's also important to recognize the violence that many women, human rights, and environmental defenders are facing as they are showing leadership for an environment. That is something that has been brought up across all of the dialogues that we've been having as Action co-leads, and something that needs to be part of our plan for transformation and our measurement of impact, so that no environmental defender who's standing up to protect our lands, protect their lands and our rights, faces the threat of violence. So thank you for raising that as well. I want to now pass to Dina Saleh, who's the regional advisor for the Near East, North Africa, and Europe division of the International Fund for Agricultural Development, or IFAD, to talk a bit around kind of thinking through both this leadership aspect, but a commitment sub-theme that's really dedicated to building the resilience and capacity of women and girls in all their diversity to be able to combat and adapt to climate impacts. So over to you to share what those action tactics and commitments look like.
Thank you, Bridget, and good day to everybody. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be part of this exciting forum, and especially after listening to Maria with all that energy that she's brought to the forum. So really, it's a great pleasure to be with you all today. So as Bridget has said, I'm the regional director at the International Fund for Agriculture Development based in Rome, but it's a global UN specialized agency. As we all know, achievement in inclusive development and shared prosperity are underpinned by women's economic empowerment and equal participation in the economy. However, in the region I represent, which is the Near East, North Africa, and Europe, despite the progress we have made in the last 10 years, economic security and autonomy remain elusive for many women in this region. Women and girls are more educated than ever. Many more women are in politics, and women are living longer and healthier lives, but there's still large inequalities. Women on average earn 25% less in this region, are more likely to be in vulnerable employment. Poverty rates are higher among women. Chances of employment are lower. At least 1 in 10 are in underage marriages. Migrant and minority women and girls face severe discrimination and exclusion in participating in peace processes and national policy agendas, as well as their access to public services and social protection are undermined. And they all, as we all heard, face an increased risk of violence. The pressing issues are, as I've said, low level of literacy, education is disrupted by conflict in this region, child labor, underage and forced marriages that are deeply rooted in gender-based discrimination and patriarchal norms. We now know with COVID-19, these disparities and violations will be exacerbated and threatening the progress we have made in the last years. So putting it in context of the coalition, as you know, our action coalition, the Feminist Action for Climate Justice, is led by a broad range of stakeholders, including IFAD, which I'm representing today. In the Action Coalition, IFAD has further formed its own coalition with the International Land Coalition to support this process. Our Action Coalition developed an area specifically targeted to build the resilience of women and girls to climate and disaster risks, mitigating climate change and addressing the loss and damages. This is because gender inequality is both a driver and consequence of exposure to climate risks and disasters, which result in disproportionate impacts on women and girls. Due to climate change, evidence shows that agricultural production will reduce drastically by 2050, leading to higher food prices and food insecurity. Globally, almost 1/3 of employed women work in agriculture, and it remains the most important employment sector for women in low income and lower middle income countries. But women and girls are not just victims of their circumstances. They display extraordinary resilience and create innovative and transformative solutions. Indigenous and rural women use ancestral knowledge and practices to build resilience in a changing climate, for example, by preserving crop biodiversity and seed varieties, protecting pollinators and local bee populations, and using natural soil building and fertilization methods, leaving the forests intact, among other things. And yet, women and girls continue to be ignored in environmental and climate planning and are often prevented from participating in community planning. So what's IFAD's perspective in this? Strengthening the resilience of rural women and girls and their capacity to cope with and recover from shocks is a vital part of IFAD's work. We work to ensure that adaptation solutions are included in our operations that build on the diverse knowledge, priorities, and capacities of both women and men to ensure stronger resilience. IFAD integrates gender concerns into its projects and programs to increase the resilience of rural communities and to enhance environmental conservation and limit the climate change and impact of shocks. So let me give you two examples. In Brazil, IFAD funded the Rural Sustainable Development Project in the semi-arid region of Bahia to empower rural populations to live in harmony with the semi-arid environment and build resilience in the face of climate change. How did we do that? Through the adoption of an agroecological approach. The participatory approach we used to bolster the productive capacity of small-scale family farms, promoting new opportunities to generate income through the transformation and processing of agricultural products and other economic activities, but stimulating the greater access of the beneficiary population to different markets while placing particular emphasis on the support to women. In Georgia, IFAD is enhancing agriculture resilience to climate change through the development of inclusive, climate-smart value chains. The Agriculture Modernization, Market Access and Resilience Project substantially contributed to the development of inclusive climate-smart value chains, contributing to Georgia's agricultural resilience to climate and boosting private sector investment, with a particular focus on women farmers and women-led rural enterprises. And the project mainstreamed a climate-smart approach through various activities, including soil and nutrition management, irrigation, value chain infrastructures, restoration of landscape, and facilitating policy dialogue on climate resilient value chains where women were involved. While we can congratulate ourselves for some progress, we know we need to go even further, amplify our impact through collective action, and bring about change at scale with a sense of urgency. That is why we're joining forces in this coalition to, amongst the many challenges, address the issue of resilience. So a few points before I conclude. What do we need in this action coalition? We need to implement an approach that can create equitable access to and control over resources, a gender-just cooperative model. Evidence shows the strong potential of agricultural and technology cooperatives to increase access to resources while boosting women's empowerment and closing gender gaps. It has strong positive impact on women's income and decision-making power at the household level and at the community level. And this is also a vital opportunity to invest in such a model to build the resilience of women and girls at the grassroots and rural level. The second is women and girls are also missing from climate decision-making processes, including at the local or municipal level, due to lack of information and capacity to engage in such processes. We must implement actions and commitments that lift up the invaluable expertise of marginalized groups,
such as grassroots and indigenous women, by enabling them to access climate planning processes, starting at the rural level where they have the best knowledge for how to manage resources sustainably. The third point, land tenure and security for women and girls can strengthen sustainable development outcomes. According to Landesa, which works to secure land rights for rural people, women's rights to land deals not only to more agricultural productivity and food security, but also to higher incomes, education, healthcare, decision-making power, and political participation. It can even reduce gender-based violence and child marriages. The UN and other development actors need support to help build government capacity for developing and implementing gender-responsive climate and environmental policy instruments in mitigating adaptation and loss and damage, as well as aligning these strategies with national development plans. And finally, we need gender-just climate solutions, in particular led by women and girls, which need to be scaled up through capacity building, mentorship, technical support, and linking to private sector actors and networks for more opportunities for investment. So as I close, I encourage every one of us to join as commitment makers to help us refine and implement these commitments to realize the vision of success. It's now or never. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Dina, and for particularly highlighting, I think it really resonated, the examples of the solutions that are already on the ground, that are already working, in terms of having all of the models that we need to create better and more resilient climate policies and climate actions, and particularly promoting that often women-led, community-led solutions are different in terms of perhaps presenting a cooperative or a different type of model of organizing, of ownership, that actually creates better outcomes for communities and for people. And that being a key possibility and a key aspect of what we can, as an action coalition, raise more awareness of and bring more attention to, and make sure it's centered in policies. Before going on to my next colleague, I did want to first thank all of our interpreters and our tech folks who are helping run this very virtual conference. We seem to be having some switches and glitches in the presentation format, but hopefully y'all stick with us as that gets figured out and we continue with our panel, hearing from folks and hearing about the different sub-themes that are aligning and defining our action coalition. So next we're going to hear from Joanita Babirye, who's the co-founder and team lead of Girls for Climate. Joanita is going to speak around our action area on data collection and intersectional data use as well. So Joanita, over to you.
Thank you so much, Bridget. My name is Joanita Babirye from Uganda, the team leader at Girls for Climate, where we are putting young women and girls at the forefront of climate action because of their vulnerability to climate change impacts. I'm very honored to be here with my fellow Action Coalition leaders to speak about the blueprint that we have been working hard to create these past few months. We've had the panelists today speak about bold and ambitious actions that could reshape the world to be more sustainable and equitable. I'm going to speak about our last and perhaps most important action area, without which our actions will remain nothing more than great ideas, and that is data. The importance of being practical as well as visionary cannot be emphasized enough. The absence of sex disaggregated data on the gender and environment nexus means that women's and girls' needs and abilities are invisible in climate and environment policies, plans, and programs. This absence leads to gender-blind policies that fail to address the impacts of climate change on women and girls, and in some cases, even worsen existing inequalities. Efforts to address the gender data gap in climate and environment sectors face particular challenges, Existing data captures experiences of communities or groups at a given time, or for a given project in a head-up manner, resulting in information that can't be aggregated and data points that are not comparable. Information on the gender-specific ways in which climate change affects rural communities and indigenous people is even more difficult to gather. This gap compounds all the way up to the international level. There are no established methodologies or standards for tracking progress on the sole SDG 13 on gender-related indicators. To establish baselines and monitor progress, we need both qualitative and quantitative data. Collected data needs to be disaggregated by sex, age, and disability in climate risk and disaster context, and analyzed, disseminated, and used to inform, monitor, and evaluate new policies and programs. To achieve this goal, we need to significantly increase financial and technical support for data production on the gender and environment nexus in all regions, and then go a step further to ensure this data is used to inform gender responsive policies, strategies, and advocacy actions. This means specifically we need to invest in better advocacy strategies to ensure national development strategies and sectoral strategies address environmental issues, including through specific gender indicators for monitoring policy implementation. 2, supporting the implementation of nationally representative individual level surveys that measure the gender environment nexus. And 3, I would say to support the creation and use of innovation for generating gender environmental statistics through non-conventional data sources, including citizen-generated data. And lastly, developing sectoral gender analysis in relation to energy, care, transportation, built infrastructure, agriculture, etc., for use in national level policy making for greening the economy. I will conclude by saying data needs to drive action. Without data, we'll only be committing ourselves to actions that cannot work in the various contexts and regions that we are aiming to find solutions for. We call upon everyone to join us on the path to make our vision for justice for all people and a healthy planet a reality. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Joanita, for the really clear articulation of what we hope to see out of this particular sub-theme. And thank you to all of our panelists for presenting the 4 sub-themes that we've articulated as part of the blueprint, which, as a reminder to folks, include a focus on shifting finance, shifting climate finance, and investing in women-led gender-just climate solutions, and investing in and centering the leadership of women and girls in all their diversity, particularly grassroots and indigenous women, in what a new regenerative and green economy looks like, through capacity building, training, technology support, to climate impacts through mitigation, through adaptation, and through addressing the impacts of loss and damage. And then finally, through the collection of data and the use of intersectional gender data and analysis at the gender and environment nexus. And so I believe we have a poll right now that we're going to launch. We're really interested to hear from all of you as allies and colleagues and activists who have joined this session to understand, and of course it might be difficult to look at these in silos, so that's fine if you struggle to prioritize, but we're interested in understanding which action area, in your perspective, is most urgent to address out of those 4 areas: finance, leadership, resilience, and data. Of course, understanding that they're very interconnected. So we'll give it just a few minutes for folks to give their answer. A minute, I should say. Okay, do we have the results of the poll? Fantastic. And of course, please continue to think through that, share with us in the questions as well. We will have a Q&A session after our next set of speakers to try to address some of the comments that have been put in. I see here there's a strong correlation to one of the key areas that we've talked about in terms of prioritizing finance. I'm sure that's quality and quantity access to finance, then resilience, leadership, and data as well. So thank you for sharing that. I want to pass now to a friend and colleague, Fleur Newman, who is the Gender Affairs Officer at the UNFCCC, maybe to react to those results as well as these sub-themes that have been presented from both your own personal and institutional perspective. So over to you, Fleur.
Thank you very much, Bridget. And it's a pleasure and an honor to be here today. It is very exciting. I lead the work on gender climate change at the UN Climate Change Secretariat, and I'm also the gender focal point and focal point for women. So I think it's really interesting to see that finance comes out on top. I don't think that's any surprise to any of us. That this is a key element. It's been a key challenge, and it continues to be an area in which we need to focus. And I'll just give a little bit of background about why the UN Climate Change Secretariat is a co-lead within the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Action Coalition, and that is in part because the gender and climate change has had its own focus area under the convention since 2012. And although there was work before that, what the focus has done is to really ensure that there is a much greater understanding now than there was back in 2012 of the relevance of gender and other multidimensional social factors that need to be considered when we're addressing climate change. And we are in the second year of the implementation of the enhanced 5-year Lima work program on gender and its gender action plan, which runs until 2024. So there's some overlap of the two programs and was agreed by countries at COP25. We see the opportunity with the Action Coalition to build on and to really enhance, complement the guidance and action which is already existing both under the UNFCCC and in other spaces. And there are very many synergies with the focus areas in the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Action Coalition, including on finance, which has a particular focus also under the UNFCCC. At the Secretariat, we facilitate and build connections between the different actors and convene spaces for technical and policy discussions and the sharing of experiences. And we also have a role in communicating and sharing knowledge. So part of our wanting to be within the Action Coalition is in fact because we see this, what we refer to as radical collaboration, is absolutely necessary in order for us to be able to make the sort of transitions and the radical transitions that we need to be making as rapidly as possible. I think it is important, though, even though the finance is so important, it's important to see the interlinkages, because as Joanita had very aptly put, you need the practical as well as the ambition must be underpinned, and data is vitally important to that. So even though it might not appear at the top of the list, it is critical, even in the case of financing, because financing can be accelerated if the data better illustrates the link between gender and climate change and how financing is benefiting or not the climate finance flows. So that data is really a very important underpinning of investment decisions as well. Climate change is a systems issue and it needs system solutions and change. And each element of the action coalition we see as in the vision, the actions and the commitments. These are kind of foundational and critical aspects of implementation. And I think the awareness raising that comes through the Action Coalition is still a vital element. What we see is that there is not yet enough understanding broadly of the linkages between gender and climate change and what we've been hearing about and talking about today. So there's a really key aspect of this, the sort of support that we can get from governments, from civil society, youth organizations, philanthropy and private sector and international organizations. We need this awareness raising to be accelerated so that the understanding of the connection is broader and deeper, so that those who are working on climate change have an understanding, but also, very importantly, so gender experts understand how the work that they're doing can make a significant contribution to raising ambition and effectiveness of climate action. We are in a situation where we need to move rapidly from business as usual, and that includes who's leading and making decisions on climate action. And so it's not news to those here, but what we need is more women in all their diversity, leading companies, finance institutions, government and parliaments. Those are the spaces in which decisions on climate action are happening, and that's where we need women in all their diversity. So in closing to my reaction to the poll, I would encourage everyone to look at where the areas in which they feel they can have the most impact. And this may be in one area or it may be in many. And it's important that, and that's okay if it's only one area or if it's in many, that's even more welcome. So we need entities and individuals and organizations and the private sector to be looking at how they can best utilize their strengths in making these commitments.
Thanks so much for that, Fleur, and for this call to action, I think, really to others around how the work of this Action Coalition is really about building that powerful ecosystem for change based on a feminist vision for systems change and the understanding that that needs to happen across all of these multiple aspects of intersections and tactics, leadership, systemic economic change, as well as capacity building. So thank you for that reflection and bringing that in. And I want to pass now to Dr. Mithika Mwenda, who is the Executive Director of the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, a really powerful and incredible alliance and network leading on a strong perspective of climate justice across the continent. And I wanted to ask you, Dr. Mwenda, to speak to your organization's work on the ground and how it showcases feminist action for climate justice. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bridget. And it's a great pleasure to address this incredible session. I first want to start by acknowledging the exceptional work which has been done by this platform since we joined it a year ago. I want to start by saying that it was a choice to join it because when the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance was founded 11 years ago in South Africa, we were looking for a voice. You know, Africa is the continent most impacted by climate crisis. Africa is the least adaptive continent by the impacts of climate crisis. And it is disadvantaged in many ways. The choice of the justice as the key one in our formation was actually not accidental. Remember, when we were founding this, the issue, the notion of climate justice was actually very rare. It was actually driven by a few activists across the globe, and we were not ashamed about it. So what we wanted is to bring about the voices of those at the front line of climate crisis. And when you come in Africa, these are smallholder women farmers, the ones who cultivate bananas for subsistence purposes, the small maize farmers, small agricultural farmers, and of course, women pastoralists who are actually found in very patriarchal society. While looking into bringing the voice of the African continent into the climate discourse, we had one challenge. Which voices are we going to bring up, either at a very local level, at national level, and at international level, and at the UNFCCC level? The presence of Africa in these very important sessions was wanting. The small percentage, you could count the number of Africans. So we had a very big assignment. What did we do? So when we started formation, we didn't want to revisit injustices to us again. And so in our founding principles, in our policies, we aim to ensure that we have gender balance. We aim to ensure that women and men play equal role in terms of governance and in terms of the processes. And that is what has informed the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. You come to the secretariat, the senior management, actually, women outnumber men. You go to the management, you find women either equal or outnumber men. And that is actually what informed our membership. I just wanted the moderator just to allow me to just show you just one image here, which are actually we captured it during the in the negotiations. I don't know whether I will be able to come. So this is a very telling image. So this is what actually has proposed and informed our negotiations. It was taken during the UNFCCC. So this is actually the image which are, and the top image is what we have been trying to see. Do we have an ideal situation where we have the image at the top so that we are not going to be having a situation we are negotiating for the future, and the future you are seeing in Paris is what you are seeing below in the image below. So I'm not going to dwell you with images, but you understand why we want to really to walk the talk. How are we going to ensure this is done? Now, we have now the NDC's implementation. We are using our cloud. We are using our outreach. We are using our network and our resources to ensure that in walking the talk, in balancing the gender, in articulating the African perspectives on climate justice, of course, which is actually gender justice stands a very prominent role. So what are we doing? We are working with top key African platforms across the continent, the African Union, for instance. Illustratively, what we have done is when we started working under the Climate for Development in Africa,
I'm not sure if we might have lost you, Dr. Mwenda. Apologies for that. But thank you for sharing the work that PACJA is doing. I understand in particular the incredible work that you are doing now to really raise ambition in nationally determined contributions across the continent, and as well as the critical analysis that you showed of the reality of, even in the spaces of the global climate change processes. Those two pictures of, one was actually the women and gender constituency, and this showcase of feminist voices and activists and all their diversity, and then the picture of decision makers from the Paris Agreement. This shows the real discrepancy of how those who are at the decision-making tables are not reflective of those who are leading on these more just solutions on the ground, and the work that we can do in this collective to really shift and reform that. And apologies that you may have been cut off a little bit early, but hopefully we can get you back in. I'm going to take this moment to pass over to Ryme Assaad, who's the co-founder of Rise 2030 and really doing some incredible on-the-ground work. Ryme, over to you to share some specific examples of what this kind of action looks like.
Hello, how are you?
Good.
So I'll be sharing a presentation. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay, great. So today I'm gonna speak about our NGO. It's called Sustain the World. And it's an NGO that is managing the project Rise 2030. I'm going to talk a little bit about our mission and vision and the results we have been doing as a grassroots movement on the ground in Lebanon. First, we are a non-governmental organization committed to serve and educate youth, women, and underserved community members in rural areas. We are using sustainability to help people build their own sustainable solutions and facility, such as this example in solar, to help them break the cycle of poverty and help their communities at the same time. What's interesting about us is that we have an all-women board, so it's an all-women leadership, and we also created some on-ground all-women team. We have also, of course, we have 50% female and male participation because we believe in equality. But by creating an all-women solar team, we were able to at least demonstrate that women can do this project on their own in the male-dominated construction sector, which has in Lebanon less than 1% representation. Accordingly, and our all-women solar team has won the 2020 UN Global Climate Action Award with the UNFCCC for the Women for Result, because we managed to break gender stereotypes in male-dominated sector that are usually not very interesting. You don't have a lot of women involved in it. As for our projects, we have many, and we'll go through them very fast. Sustain Beirut is a project that started after the huge explosion that happened in Lebanon on August 4th. And there was a humanitarian response after that blast that we introduced. More than 300,000 people lost their homes. More than 50,000 were impacted. Our NGO and our houses as activists were destroyed as well. And we are one of the also victims of the blast. Through this initiative, we were aiming at creating job opportunities and assistance for vulnerable families on the ground. We have more than 20 partner organizations. We created more than 500 direct job opportunities, and the indirect impact on the families is 2,500, and overall community is around 50,000. We focused on sustainability sectors like recycling, clothing assistance, refurbishing when it comes to circular economy, medical supply, food relief. These are some of the NGOs that we are working with. You have Live Love, who are working on the reconstruction, Live Love Recycle, who are working on recycling the waste and the glass that after the explosion and trying to create products with them to reduce waste. We also have Fabric Aid, who are collecting donations for clothes and then selling them at a micro price as a social enterprise. but a very, very low cost because people are suffering. We have people cooking for free for the beneficiaries, distributing medical supply, and helping the people affected by the blast. We also created a COVID-19 initiative, whereas we supported families and municipalities in terms of crisis and assisted them. The refugees, the people, and the municipalities on a decentralized level, because the load was very heavy on the government, and people had to act on their own, especially to help their community members, to help the elderly, and to distribute medical supply and food, because we don't have a government right now. And then Rise 2030, the project that everyone knows about recently, is a community-led initiative that empowers women and youth. Rise 2030 launched the first all-women solar team to challenge the gender stereotypes in male-dominated sector, construction sector. It's a project that focuses on rural development, empowerment, and the decentralization model, because in our country, we lack a government. This is one of the examples where women were showing leadership when the government was not able to assist its citizens. We have waste management, so we cover waste sector. We have solar tree in the parks, so public parks, and we have wastewater treatment plants, so we also cover water. So we cover all the basics that are related to waste, water, energy, and the basic needs of people, and it's a direct intervention on the ground to directly assist the people. By doing so, we try to help in the economic crisis that Lebanon have been facing, because we started with an economic crisis in 2019. Then in 2020, we had the COVID crisis. And at the end, we had the Beirut explosion, which literally destroyed the country because we needed a lot of help and support at this time. So increasing investment in sustainable solution, creating jobs, which will create some expenditures in rural area, reducing the leakage because we have a very high cut of electricity. We have 8 to 18 hours of daily blackouts. So people usually rely on illegal generators, which are really a problem for the CO2 emission, and the import of energy, which accounts to 33% of the budget deficit of our government, who is going bankrupt, and soon people will not be able to even have access to electricity. And all of these factors can help people have a long-term economic growth, because they are part of the multiplier effect on the GDP, and it also creates jobs, so it helps with the whole cycle of the economy. How we do that is we focus on job creation, on building sustainable solution, and generating income on a decentralized level with the community members and the municipalities, so that they have their own facilities which are operating and their people are building them. And this creates, on a small scale of decentralized cities, it creates relief for rural areas, especially because they are the most in need. And how we do that is we try to focus on community members, international community, farmers, municipalities, local NGOs, and youth and women associations to all work together and build their own sustainable solution. We do not focus on bringing someone to do awareness, because when people build their own solutions, they become more and more aware about the problem that they have been facing, and they also start promoting sustainable solutions and creating awareness themselves on a community level through all these partners and in coordination with international NGOs. We've had a lot of partners, international and local, and we were asked about how this aligns with the vision of the Feminist Action Coalition. So this initiative helps on the daily activities of people, such as waste, water treatment, and direct energy. So these sectors contribute directly to the human rights and the basic human rights, such as access to electricity, education, food, which are not happening here. And the Lebanese government hasn't formed, the Lebanese people haven't formed a government since the explosion. So we are literally suffering. We are on 3 crises: economic, then COVID, then explosion, and we have been without government for almost 7 months. People have lost their trust in the government. The international community lost their trust in the government, and even the people have lost their trust. So what's happening is everyone is relying on NGOs to do the actual work, and women are actually on the front row and leading this change. And once women are integrating, they are focusing on sustainable solutions, sustainable rebuilding, such as the Rise 2030 project or the Sustain Beirut project. And they are proving to be very powerful in their intervention, and they are making a huge success. And this is why we need urgent action on the ground to support those people, to support those NGOs who are the only people who are now responding to the people's need, because the government isn't formed. It has been 7 months, a lot of international pressure, and the politicians are just not working. So such initiatives which are decentralized and directly benefit the communities and their daily needs can be done through NGOs, especially when you have a poverty rate of above 50% and a huge currency devaluation, which is around 85%. So we are victims of explosions, and our offices and houses were destroyed, and yet we still had to go on ground and rebuild Beirut ourselves. This is one of the examples of a community-led initiative that is kind of replacing the government at the moment, because we don't have a government, we don't have a choice, we were forced to do that. And that's it, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ryme. Thank you for the incredible work and for providing that model. I think that one of the things that strikes me a lot in terms of its relationship to the key principles identified in some of the sub-themes that we have is around the building up of gender just climate solutions and the diversity and what that looks like. Really wanting to make sure that that is not about sort of coming up with a model at a top level and imposing that on communities, but understanding how community-led initiatives are often the most sustainable, those that could be both scaled and replicated. And that really is part of, I think, both the thematic area on building resilience, as well as the thematic area on climate finance. And I'm recognizing we're cutting short on time. I'm hoping we still will have time for some Q&A, but I did also, because of the focus of your project as well, I wanted to repeat a question that someone has put in the chat around gender transformative climate education, just to say that is a cross-cutting issue in the Action Coalition of how do we invest in education, both as it relates to building climate resilience, as well as it relates to the leadership of women and girls and all their diversity, from both investing in job training and women and girls training in quote unquote green sectors, but also to investing in gender transformative climate education. So one in which breaks down both gendered norms of what a good job is, what a green job is, as well as one that that really provides sustainability education to folks at a very young age. So sorry for that. I'm just going to pass directly to Barbara Rambousek, who's the Director of Gender and Economic Inclusion from EBRD, to come in on next intersection. And over to you, Barbara.
Thank you very much, Bridget. And I cannot turn on my video, by the way. I think this has to be done centrally. So just to let you know that, hopefully this can be done. Okay, here we are. Okay, so thank you very much for the opportunity to join you today, and thank you also for the Government of Mexico and the UN Women in particular for bringing us all together today for this very important event and discussion. I'm delighted to be able to participate and to be part of this conversation. I'm also honored as EBRD at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development that we are now joining the Action Coalition for Feminist Action for Climate Justice. And I really look forward to working with all the partners that have been speaking already, but that are also joining us today to work on this very important topic and very important agenda. I think what we have already heard in a way, partnership and joint action and international cooperation are critical, both in order to advance the agenda for gender equality, but also to tackle climate action. I think for us, really, those two areas are intrinsically interlinked. You cannot develop and implement effective measures in order to tackle climate change and the implications of that without bringing people along, without bringing or giving people opportunities to take advantage of the opportunities that come from the green economy transition, access to jobs and entrepreneurship and skills, etc. I think tackling climate change effectively does require already that we change how we live, how we work, a lot of very small decisions in everyday life, but also there needs to be the political mandate to take some of the very tough decisions that are required at regional, at country, at international, global levels. So we really need to bring everybody along, and gender equality lies at the very center of that. So this interlink between climate change and gender equality for us is very, very central. So what needs to happen and what roles can we all play? At the EBRD, we invest in supporting in our countries of operations to become sustainable market economies. And what we mean by sustainable market economy is one that has a number of characteristics. It's well-governed, resilient, competitive, but also very importantly, it is one that is green and inclusive. So one that creates economic opportunities for everybody. And we do this by supporting primarily the private sector. So we invest in our private sector clients, but then we also in a way use that engagement that we have with the private sector in order to achieve policy reforms. We're very proud at the EBRD that we are primarily a green focused bank now. So 2 years ago, 46% of our investments were in investments that were green. And over the coming years, particularly over the next 5 years, we hope to substantially increase that share to well over half and beyond of our investments. And we combine this strong focus on green with the focus also on tackling inequality of opportunity, and in particular, gender inequality. We have already over the past years invested over 14 billion euros in projects that create equal access to, for example, jobs and skills for women, including those entering the labor markets, but also lifelong learning, upskilling and reskilling of women. In entrepreneurship and finance, particularly focusing on women, where we have a large women in business program across over 20 countries, working with 50 partner financial institutions and having impacted already more than 90,000 women across our region. And then the third area for us is really to ensure quality, accessible and affordable access to services, ICT connectivity, digital connectivity, but also infrastructure. So the nexus between green and gender permeates all these activities and also very strongly, therefore, aligns with the vision of the Feminist Action for Climate Justice. And so we are particularly delighted to be part of that. We know that women are disproportionately affected by risks that come from climate change. They are underrepresented in reaping the benefits of green investments, for example, as energy professionals, but also entrepreneurs, where we know that women have much less access to green finance in particular. We also know that they have less access to advisory services to better understand how to adopt green technologies and where and when to do so in the best way. And then finally, women as consumers of green products and services. So the integration of gender and climate finance cannot be an afterthought. It cannot be something that is sort of tagged on at the end of an investment. It has to come right at the start. It has to be right there from the word go. And there is certainly no trade-off, but both have to come together. So what opportunities do exist? For example, I think there's a strong focus on supporting women entrepreneurs. At EBRD, we have something called a Green Economy Finance Facility across 5 countries at the moment, but 10 very soon, where we really integrate a focus on not just green financing for SMEs, but actually particularly building the capacity and skills of women entrepreneurs to understand what type of technologies work best for their businesses, and then to access finance. And in parallel to work with our partner financial institutions, the banks basically, to recognize women as a viable market segment, one that is important to reach. And it's not about CSR, this is not about doing good, this is actually about a sound business case. And then to help those partner financial institutions to build the products and the services, including non-financial services, to reach that market segment and to serve it properly. Another area is where we support women's employment in green sectors. In Egypt and Kazakhstan, for example, we're building partnerships between the governments, technical education institutions, and the private sector to provide women with the green skills and the knowledge they need in order, for example, to enter the renewables energy sector, to enter careers and then progress in those careers in that sector, because we know that these sectors are growth sectors, are sectors for the future. Another area is, of course, also developing gender responsive and sustainable transport and infrastructure solutions. And I'm very proud to say here that over the past year, we have fully integrated a focus on gender and economic inclusion across our Green Cities programs. As part of the Green Cities programs, we work with municipalities to develop Green Cities action plans, so to better understand how green technologies can be integrated into how cities are structured, planned, operated, and managed, from transport infrastructure to public realm. But then now we also look at that through a gender lens. So we are working with our Green Cities action plans and with our municipal partners to see how women can access employment and skills opportunities in this context. In Tbilisi, in Georgia, for example, we have already worked with our client to train women to become bus drivers or metro drivers. A second area is to look at safe transport. We know that sexual harassment and sexual violence, particularly on public transport, is a huge barrier for many women across many different, if not all, countries in the world to access public transport. So we are working with our clients to take effective measures to prevent and tackle gender-based violence and harassment in all its forms as part of public transport developments. And then finally, also to really look at clear policies, operational and design measures when it comes to city planning and urban transport planning. So this is in a way what we do across our investments, across our portfolios. But as I mentioned at the start, we also then take that in engagement we have with our clients to look at policy reforms, to look at much more systemic solutions, and to look at how we can tackle those barriers that exist in relation to regulations in order to really make it easier for women to take advantages of the opportunities that the green economy transition can bring. So as part of our Green Cities action plans, we look at gender budgeting. We look at how women can be part of decision-making processes when it comes to urban design and also urban management, when it comes to policy solutions on green skills and green jobs. And for example, in Almaty, in Belgrade, Kiev, and Novi Sad, we have already started those activities. When we look at women entrepreneurs, we are working with countries such as Uzbekistan or the Kyrgyz Republic or also Kazakhstan to undertake gender lens investment climate reforms. So to really understand what regulatory reforms would be needed in order to enable women to start up and grow their businesses, including with a focus on access to advisory and finance on green technologies. Secondly, we built the capacity of regulators to understand the specific focus on women entrepreneurs and to also understand the value and importance of sex disaggregated data, for example, to then inform those policy solutions. And at the labor market level, we help to open up labor markets for women to perform all types of jobs, including, for example, in the energy sector in Kazakhstan, where unfortunately there are still barriers for women to do just that because they are women. So this policy reform in a way complements what we do on the investment side and really seeks to substantially enhance the impact beyond an individual investment. Challenges, of course, remain, and we've heard a lot about that in relation to the COVID crisis and the way that this has further entrenched and actually exacerbated many of the inequalities that women face. We know that women's jobs are 1.8 times more likely to be vulnerable to the crisis. Women bear, of course, the brunt of the unpaid care work. And interestingly, that is even in households where women are the primary earner and they actually earn more than their partner or husband. we also know that women are more likely to reduce their hours or drop out of the labor market altogether as a result of the crisis. And then, of course, women entrepreneurs find it harder to access formal finance and advisory for a number of reasons. And that includes that their enterprises are in sectors that are harder hit, but that they also have lower collateral and other assets that they can put forward. So it's that combination of factors which we also try to address as part of our solidarity package, which was or is our 21 billion crisis response package, where we have substantially increased the number of our projects that have a specific gender and in particular economic inclusion component. Just to give you an example, from 2019 to 2020, the number of projects with an inclusive component has increased by 24%, so almost a quarter, which is very important from our side. So what we need to focus on is going forward. It's a focus on joint collaboration, on sharing lessons learned and best practice, bringing together, similar to what some of the speakers have said, what is our unique contribution? What is the contribution that we can make, but in the much wider ecosystem? And how can we jointly build up that ecosystem? How can we focus on impact, but also better measure that impact? And this really comes to a systematic gender assessments at sector and regional level, indicators, clear action plans, and then ways to measure that impact that can be achieved. So in this context, I very much look forward to being part of this action coalition to make the contribution that we have based on our lessons learned and our experience, but also to learn from others and to, in a way, at the end, achieve more jointly together than we could on our own. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Barbara. And I think that last point is really key to where there's possibility for transformation in this action coalition. The fact that we are willing, as very different and diverse partners coming from civil society and feminist movements, coming from government and institutional organizations, private sector institutional organizations as well, to really both identify what are these key aspects needed for change, as well as be in struggle together towards this very, very clear vision of what a more just and livable future looks like, one that centers the rights of the human rights of all, that promotes gender equality, and that ensures environmental integrity. And I think that that there's an opportunity here to really think through what does commitments from a broad range of stakeholders towards that vision look like. And so I want to now pass to our final intervention, coming from Her Excellency Thilmeeza Hussain, who's the permanent representative of the Maldives to the UN. Ambassador Hussain, I'd love for you to speak to us about how anyone who's on this call who is inspired by both the change that is needed, but what commitments they might be able to make to this, whether it's in their own work, in their own organizations, towards enhancing leadership, whether they think that there's a strategy or tactic that they want to see centered in our action, how can they join us in the work of this action coalition? Over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Bridget, and thank you for the excellent manner in which you are moderating today's session. A very good day to all of you. As member states in this coalition, the Republic of Maldives is very honored to be co-leading the Feminist Action for Climate Justice, along with Costa Rica. Allow me to also thank all the panelists and speakers for their invaluable contribution to today's discussion and to our work. As you all know, 25 years ago, the Beijing Platform for Action laid out an ambitious path for progress for the rights of women and girls. Today, we still struggle to bring transformative changes for women and girls in all their diversity. And we heard of many of the challenges addressed by various speakers this morning, the challenges women and girls face. We heard from many speakers this morning. As Lopa and Bridget highlighted earlier, we are facing an unprecedented crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic, that has exacerbated climate vulnerabilities to even greater human cost. There is no pause in global warming. In the Maldives, we continue to experience beach erosion, coral bleaching, freshwater contamination, extreme weather impacts. The climate crisis is threatening our very existence. We are in the front lines of climate change and our women with us. In most communities, women are disproportionately suffering from, whether with the pandemic or even more from, especially during this pandemic, even more from socioeconomic impacts, like loss of livelihood with additional caregiving responsibilities, increased violence against women, and restriction in mobility. These new challenges with existing gender norms, roles, and biases limit our ability to adapt to and mitigate climate change. The Generation Equality Forum has presented us with a unique chance at a new world, one that works for women and girls as for men and boys, one that is just, equal, and fair, a thoughtful and a more resilient world. Women's empowerment and leadership is critical to achieving this resilient and just world and addressing the climate emergency we are in. And only by working together and ensuring gender equality at every step of decision-making process can we address and end these inequalities. We need to ask ourselves, why are our aspirations from Beijing conference 25 years ago still unrealized? We need to reflect on this. It is perhaps time to change our approach, time for a more targeted and an integrated approach, catalyzing government, civil society, private sector, academia, and all communities to address our common challenges together. We believe that the Generation Equality Forum is structured precisely to do so, to unite all stakeholders and accelerate results by allowing public and private actors to work together in translating existing processes into gender-responsive ones. The PACJA Action Blueprint identifies the targets, the root causes of climate crisis, and gender inequality, which are inextricably linked and reinforced by public, private, and social incentives. We need actions that target and reverse these negative feedback loops, like enabling women and girls to lead a just transition to an inclusive, circular, regenerative, green economy, and displaying their needs and abilities by increasing the collection and use of data on gender-environment nexus. The Maldives believes this action blueprint sets out a path forward for tackling defining issues of this century in a way that addresses gross inequalities that we see today. When the pandemic hit, Maldivian women led our Emergency Operations Center and our Health Protection Agency. We are still relying on their capabilities in our recovery efforts. Despite all the challenges women face, they are in the front lines and fence lines, serving and bearing the weight of our communities. And this is the case true to countries all around the world. And we hear this over and over again. From our panelists, we also heard how women and girls are spearheading innovative solutions. They need to be supported and upscaled. Reshaping our economies and political systems in response to climate change gives us a crucial opportunity to address historical and structural inequalities in our power relations and learn from the invaluable expertise of marginalized groups, such as grassroots and indigenous women. In climate finance, a gender-responsive approach is not only a matter of equity and equality, but also of the most effective and efficient use of limited resources available, both for mitigation and adaptation. We know many financial institutions and donors recognize gender responsiveness as a guiding principle. These considerations are but often overlooked in mobilization of climate finance. Only very limited funds and mechanisms have actually operationalized these principles through established modalities. We believe developing and integrating gender-responsive funding guidelines and criteria will enable a more practical approach across the various funding windows and instruments. Feminist action for climate justice is an opportunity to harness the momentum of climate action to concrete more gender and climate equitable economic and political systems, especially as shocks like COVID-19 prompt behavior change and economic and political responses. So we may now have a new window of opportunity. We need to pave the way for more women and girls to overcome the socioeconomic barriers, inhibiting them from engaging in the political, business, and civic arena. Barbara highlighted just now that, and I agree with her, we need political commitment at the highest level. We need policy reforms supplemented by capacity building, training, and incentives to enhance the representation of women and girls throughout our society. In the Maldives, women's leadership in decision-making has been a key policy of the government, and we are working on ensuring representation of women at all levels of leadership. We have prioritized gender mainstreaming through our National Strategic Action Plan. We need political leadership from all the governments across the world. The action cited today cannot be advanced without the engagement of all stakeholders, civil society organizations, youth, governments, private sector, philanthropy, and international organizations. The time to act is now, while we still have time. On behalf of the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Coalition, Maldives asks you all today to be bold and to join us on this path to make our vision of justice for all people and a healthy planet a reality. We need an integrated approach to address both climate change and gender issues concurrently. Women and girls have immense untapped potential to address climate crisis. Our mission must be to empower them. Join us as commitment makers to realize these goals. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for that really powerful call to action. I think in this Action Coalition, we want to be very clear about the challenges that we face, the reality of the urgent need for action, but also unafraid to be bold in living audaciously towards transformation and justice. And with that, I want to pass to Lopa to help close us out in terms of presenting next steps of the Action Coalitions. Lopa, over to you.
Thank you so much, Bridget, and thank you so much, leaders and participants, for this discussion. It was not just inspiring and powerful, but it was a discussion which so clearly highlighted the determination that all of you have to make change now. The ambassador from Maldives talked about the fact that we have a little time. This is the time. I would say we have time, yes, but barely. If we do not act now, then there is no planet B. There is no plan B. The issue of climate change and the action for feminist climate justice is absolutely imperative. So as we head into the to the Generation Equality Forum in Paris, we encourage all leaders to make bold and groundbreaking commitments and to invite other stakeholders and partners to join as commitment makers. Without your feminist action, we will not have a world left. And therefore, the catalytic role that commitment makers will play in the success of these action coalitions, in making the groundbreaking commitments that are necessary now to bring life to these blueprints, to finalize and bring life to these blueprints and their implementation and monitoring as we go into Paris. The application platform for commitment making is live on the Generation Equality Forum website. Please join with your commitments that will transform the world, not just for us, but for generations to come. I want to add to Bridget's words when she said, joy and justice. I want to say this is the time that we move forward with joy for justice, yes, but determination and courage. This is what is required at this point in time. So join us as commitment makers to build the bold commitments that are necessary to transform the world for the women and girls and all those who live in it to one of equality where all may thrive. Thank you so much, and back to you, Bridget.
Thank you, Lopa. Thank you to everyone. A huge thanks to our tech support, our translators, interpreters who have been with us for that, not only this whole process, but this session as well. Thank you to the fellow panelists. Just in closing, to say again, I think has already been articulated here, we have no time to waste. The time to act is now, and we are ready to be bold and ambitious, even in the face of very, very conflicting and deeply urgent crises. We have the solutions in front of us. And I think that together we can build a really strong vision and implement action, feminist action, to deliver on climate justice. So thank you to everyone who continues to be engaged in this space and who helped make this moment possible. Onwards to Paris, and looking forward to hopefully engaging with many more of you in defining what this blueprint for action looks like. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.